The three stories that I'm going to narrate today all come from three former colleagues. Two of them from here in Las Vegas, and one from my former stomping ground in the Coachella Valley out in Southern California. And I requested that they actually send them to somebody like Let's Read or Unit 522, Mr. Nightmare, Southern Cannibal, any of the more popular and well-known narrators here on YouTube. But they pretty much insisted that they didn't want to do that. They wanted me to narrate the stories, they wanted me to cover it, and they wanted me to put it on my channel. And even though I didn't believe I had a narrator's voice, I was able to use a pitch down and slightly disguise the voice. It made it come together a little better. And with the added help of special effects, sound effects, and pictures, I was able to feel that I was able to do a decent job. And please don't judge me too much on the narration, because again, you have to have the right equipment, you have to have the right cadence, the right tone. There's a lot to narrating. It's not just simply reading it off of a page. You have to have a style and a way of being able to speak it and express it, and I just don't believe I have that. Posting a video like this is fairly easy. It comes off your head, you just have to explain it. But actually narrating somebody else's story, it's very different, very difficult. So come join me today as I narrate the stories of three former colleagues and their scariest moments during their work time as security officers.
All units, Mayday declared. Clear all traffic.
I've been in security for a little more than 6 years now. I have worked only one property, a casino, not on the major strip area, but rather a locals casino in one of the worst neighborhoods in Las Vegas. A little backstory. I started as a floor officer and eventually worked my way through bike officer and into a supervisory role, eventually landing the title of shift manager on the graveyard shift. This particular event takes place during the nationwide shutdown due to the COVID-19 pandemic. Like all businesses deemed to be non-essential, the entire hotel and casino were closed for business. However, my casino also owned an adjoining RV park that remained in service. All employees were laid off, with the exception of a few select security personnel. The authorized personnel consisted of shift managers, assistant managers, and a few bike officers for each shift to maintain a presence outside the casino and the RV park. For the most part, it was the most relaxing time I ever had. I primarily sat in my office, watched YouTube or movies on my computer. Once an hour, I would conduct a check of the casino to ensure everything was okay. However, one night, one of the creepiest things I've ever experienced happened about 3 weeks into the shutdown. I was sitting in my office like normal, watching a pretty intriguing documentary about World War II, when the sound of one of my bike officers' voices came blaring over my radio. The officer announced that he had received a welfare check and was requesting my presence in the RV park. For those who don't know, a welfare check is a request made by a person, usually a close friend or family member, who have not heard from the individual for a while and are concerned for their welfare. 99% of the time, the check results in discovering the person was fine and the reasons for their lack of reaching out vary, but usually easily explainable. Normally, we would not do welfare checks at 3 o'clock in the morning on the graveyard shift. However, due to the pandemic, this rule had recently changed. Slightly irritated by the request, I strapped on my duty belt and made my way to the RV park. On my arrival, I met with the bike officers and asked who and where the person requesting the welfare check was. The bike officers told me that they had been stopped by a man near the RV office and asked to conduct the welfare check. They explained the man had told them that he needed to run home and check on his dogs, but he would come back. The bike officer stated that the man had identified the particular space and the occupant as a friend of his. The man had stated that the friend's wife had recently left him, and he had not been seen in several days by anyone. Furthermore, the man had not shown up to work, and his truck had not moved from out in front of the trailer. Normally, the person requesting the welfare check would need to be present due to information needing to be gathered before it could proceed. The company policy was very strict on this rule. After waiting for nearly 15 minutes and seeing no sign of the requesting guest, I nearly decided to deny the request. However, there was something about this situation that just gave me a feeling of unease. Me and the bike officers conducted what is known as an outer perimeter check of the trailer. A nice, newer mid-size model trailer, a beautiful new model Ford F-350 dually pickup truck sat in the designated parking spot in front of the trailer. As we conducted the check, I could hear the distinct sound of two dogs barking and whining coming from inside the trailer. These seemed more of distress and desperation than of aggression. Something told me, despite the guests not being present, I needed to conduct the welfare check. With the bike officers behind me, we knocked on the door of the trailer and announced ourselves as security. After several knocks and receiving no answer, I tried the door handle hoping to find it locked. My hopes were dashed as I felt the door engage and pop open. As soon as I opened the door, the smell hit me like a ton of bricks. I could see a small amount of light creeping through the window on the opposite side of the trailer. Through this light, I could see the shadows of hundreds, if not thousands of flies, circling the area in front of me. I knew immediately what I was looking at and quickly closed and secured the door. I advised my officers to back away from the trailer as the smell had caused my eyes to water and my nostrils to burn. My stomach was turning and I had to try hard not to vomit. I stepped away from the trailer and took several minutes to gather myself before contacting 911. I can still remember the long pause taken by the operator as I said the words. I have a potential 419, or dead body, in one of the trailers here on my property. I continued to answer the operator's questions and was told to monitor the trailer from a distance until law enforcement and emergency medical services could arrive. What seemed like an hour, but was actually only about 12 minutes, police officials and EMS arrived on scene. Immediately, law enforcement began speaking with my bike officers about the events leading up to our arrival at the trailer. It was not long before the trailer was taped off and the area was crawling with uniformed deputies and detectives. After receiving confirmation of what I already knew, I made all the required notifications to my superiors. The detectives determined the body was the owner of the trailer. They questioned my bike officer about the man who had actually requested the welfare check. After providing a description of the man and his attire, the police stared at each other with a look of what can only be described as bewilderment. At this point, one of the officers produced an ID and asked, "Is this him?" After a brief look, both bike officers identified the man in the photo as the man who had stopped them and requested the welfare check. The detectives again looked at each other with the same look of concern and asked again, "Are you sure this is the man who requested the check?" The bike officers stared hard and intently at the ID before them, before again confirming 100% the man on the license was the man who had requested the welfare check. The detectives walked away for a few minutes and appeared to be having a conversation. Returning only a few moments later, the detective would go on to tell us something that to this day still makes my stomach churn more than the smell that came from that trailer. The ID they had produced belonged to the deceased owner of the trailer. The detective said the man was wearing clothes identical to what my bike officers described the requesting party was wearing. Never before or since have I seen two people lose all color in their faces as fast as those bike officers did. The dogs were removed from the trailer, and their fate is unknown to me to this day. The body was removed and surveillance footage was requested. 2 days later, the footage was completed by a surveillance agent. The footage revealed the last time the man had been seen was 4 days prior to the welfare check. He had been observed on camera arriving at his trailer around 8 p.m. and carrying a pharmacy bag. That bag believed to carry the antidepressants he would go on to use to overdose. However, the strange part is when the footage of my officers meeting with the man was viewed, what I observed on the footage still haunts me to this day. It clearly showed the officers enter the area around the RV office. They stop, proceed in a casual conversation for roughly 2 minutes before both officers turn towards a grassy area near the RV office and appear to be verbally engaging another individual in conversation. They are both seen riding towards the area and stopping just shy of the curb, as if they could not hear who the person was speaking. It is clear by their motions and by their mouths moving that they are engaging somebody in that area. Unfortunately, the area where the man was standing was one of only 5 places on the entire property which was not seen by the cameras. What's strange is all the points that lead to that spot were covered, and no one was observed entering or leaving that area prior to or after the encounter. While both the police and property superiors were obviously suspicious of this, because it was ruled an obvious suicide with no other signs of coming or going from the trailer, no further thought was put into the oddity of the footage. While I have been and always will be a certified skeptic, just recounting this story, however, makes the hair on the back of my neck stand up. Since this incident, one of the bike officers involved has quit. The other has since been promoted to an assistant manager position on the swing shift. I mentioned this situation only once to him, and he told me in no uncertain terms he never wanted to discuss it ever again.
Now, after my buddy submitted this story to me, he actually took me to his job where he still works and showed me the locations where this actually took place. And what's worse, he did it on the graveyard shift where he still works. And seeing these places and learning this story, it's enough to raise the hair on the back of your neck. Now, I'm a skeptic myself. I believe that if I can't see it, I don't believe it. And there's never been anything that I've ever seen that makes me believe in the supernatural. Not saying that it's a bad thing that you do. I'm just saying I personally have never seen anything that would lead me to believe the supernatural exists. And I asked him repeatedly if he currently believes in the supernatural, and he still insists that he doesn't, but states that whenever he thinks about this case, that it kind of starts swaying him to believe.
In 2017, I had recently arrived in Las Vegas, hoping to start over after finalizing a very nasty divorce. The events leading up to my divorce were pretty similar to many who serve their country in the armed forces. You get married quickly to someone you barely know, and just before a deployment, not knowing any better, you grant someone you barely know access to your bank accounts and your home and everything else. You deploy, come home on leave anywhere from 6 to 8 months later to find your bank accounts and home are cleared out, and your loving new spouse is shacked up with someone new. Now, most of the time, you cut your losses, sign the divorce papers, and remove them from anything that would allow them to cause any further damage. Unfortunately for me, my ex-wife hired a lawyer and tried going after me for alimony and child support for her 2 children, who I had met a grand total of 3 times. However, in the end, things worked out pretty well for me. The judge denied both the alimony and child support, and actually made her take on the large credit card bills she had racked up while I was deployed. He also ruled that she needed to return the $10,000 wedding ring set I had purchased for her, as a way to pay back some of the nearly $50,000 she had drained from my account. As you can guess, this did not sit well with her, and she threatened to send her new mixed martial arts boyfriend to, quote-unquote, take care of me. Well, my time with the Army had come to an end, and I had decided to hightail it out of town before anything further could happen. On my arrival in Las Vegas, I used the remaining money I had to set myself up and get the required licensing I needed to start work as a private security officer. I wound up taking a job for a company who provided security for large events, music concerts, sporting events, etc. I also had begun taking courses at the local junior college with absolutely no idea of what I wanted to study. However, the money was okay for what I had to do and allowed time for me to study. The MGI bill I earned while in the service came in pretty handy, helped pay for my college and my living costs. So I was set up actually pretty nicely. Each event I worked always brought the same problems, however. Big attitudes, drugs, alcohol, and the inevitable collision course that follows that particular combo. Usually, based on the event, you can gauge what problems you will most likely encounter. So, when I was told I would be working a country music festival, I prepared for the obvious rednecks who would get overly drunk and try to pick fights with anyone who looked at them or their woman wrong. However, what actually lay ahead would change the lives of everyone who attended that concert and the city of Las Vegas as a whole. The event was a 3-day venture, and after 2 nights of dealing with the issues, the 3rd and final night had finally come. Stoked for it to almost be over, I continued doing what I normally did, walking the grounds and checking in with my supervisor to let him know that I was okay and to report anything I found suspicious. Honestly, the thing I remember most before all hell broke loose was hearing the crowd erupt in applause as they introduced the main act for the night.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome to the stage, Mr. Jason Allen.
Well, this made me happy, not because I'm a country music fan, but because I knew the night would soon be coming to an end. The proverbial light at the end of the tunnel, shall we say. I can honestly say I do not remember hearing the first shots fired. Not sure if my mind has blocked out the memory, or if I truly did not hear them because of the roar of the crowd.
Oh my God, they're still shooting. Oh my God, oh my God, oh my God. They're still shooting. They're still shooting. And your friend has been shot? Oh my God.
But I do remember hearing the screams of excitement suddenly change to screams of fear, as the sounds of distant gunfire could be heard raining down. I remember hearing a whistle and a cracking sound as a portion of the ground by my feet exploded in front of me. I had heard this sound before, during my tour of Iraq, and I looked up to the stage to see the performer and his band members running from the stage as the crowd was now in total chaos. I sat shocked for what I could only describe as hours, but was most likely only a few seconds, before I heard a man yelling,
"Dude, they're shooting! Get out of here!"
I turned to see the man lying on the ground and yelling at me as he attempted to shelter a woman from the assault in progress. I began running towards the fence like everyone else with no idea of where I was going or what was happening. I could hear screaming coming from the radio and booming into my earpiece. I cannot tell you what was being said. Fear had completely gripped me. Suddenly, flashbacks to my tour in Iraq came to me, and my military training began to kick in. Get low, zigzag, and find cover. I looked around for something to take cover behind. That's when I saw it. A beautiful young blonde female running towards me as she was struck and fell hard to the ground. I began to run towards her when I heard that cracking sound once again. I fell to the ground and began to do what's known as a low crawl toward the young woman in an attempt to help. As I reached out for her, my hand felt something warm and wet. I pulled my hand up and saw it was covered in blood. I yelled at her several times if she needed help, but received no response. Suddenly, I felt someone grabbing my shoulders and screaming,
"You can't help her! Get out of here!"
I looked up and saw a man. He was wearing jeans, a blue jean shirt with rolled up sleeves, a black cowboy hat, and black cowboy boots. Large amounts of blood were smeared all over the front of his shirt and jeans. I barely had time to process what was happening as the man yanked me to my feet. We ran towards the fence, and that's when I saw something that still stuns me to this day. In the middle of the people running for their lives, one man stood in the field, a beer in his hand while staring directly at a casino across the street, his right arm above his head and the middle finger on his hand extended in the one-finger salute. He did not budge. He did not move. He stood there, prepared to die, to show the maniac causing all the bloodshed he was not afraid, and what he thought of him. I don't fully remember how I got out of the area, but I remember taking shelter behind a bunch of vehicles in the parking area. Flashing red and blue lights and the sounds of sirens, while people wailing and crying, was all I could hear. Out of everything that has happened in my life, from birth through the military, I never thought this would be something I would ever experience. I quit my job and moved away from Las Vegas within a week. I also decided security was not for me. I never learned the fate of the woman who was struck or the man who gave the finger to the Grim Reaper himself. All I can say for sure is, I will never attend any concert or sporting event, ever, again.
The Route 91 Harvest Festival, or what's known as October 1st, here in Las Vegas, wound up with 58 people, including the shooter, dead. Over 200 people injured. And a sold-out concert full of people with reoccurring nightmares and PTSD. To this day, it's the deadliest mass shooting in the U.S. history. And for one of my buddies to have actually been knee-deep in the middle of what happened, to this day, still scares me.
In 1999, I worked for a private security company in the Coachella Valley in Southern California. The Coachella Valley consists of 7 different towns. Most notably is the city of Palm Springs. The main office for my company sat in a town called Palm Desert and mostly supplied security for very upscale country clubs and golf resorts throughout the valley. After working my way through the ranks, I wound up as a patrol supervisor known as an Atom Unit. My responsibility was to drive a marked security vehicle from one end of the valley to the next, checking on a select number of posts to ensure proper staffing and the guards were adhering to the rules and SOPs, or standard operating procedures, of the company. I would also respond to certain businesses if an alarm was set off and report any suspicious activity. These were few and far between, but would occasionally happen, most often during windstorms or the occasional earthquake. However, sometimes it was a motion sensor, which would require law enforcement notification to enter and secure the building. I can honestly say 99% of the time there was nothing found and the shift went on as usual. That is, until one night toward the end of the year. The winters in the valley are usually very mild, and due to this, an influx of retirees would arrive to stay in their vacation homes to avoid the colder, snowy winters in their home states. We refer to these individuals as snowbirds. This particular winter, however, was not expected and from the onset was much colder than usual. Anyone who works security will tell you the most times staffing is horrible, and for every one person hired, 2 or 3 will quit. Due to this, gaining overtime was not an issue, and the extra money was always nice when wanting to save for a trip or for a newer car. The Atom Unit shifts rotated. In order to keep it fair, we would work 3 months day shift, 3 months swing shift, and 3 months graveyard. At the start of the winter that year, I had just arrived back on the swing shift. Now, California arguably is the most anti-firearm state in the U.S. Not going to spill any political or Second Amendment beliefs here, but it's imperative to the story. This company allowed us to carry absolutely nothing but a flashlight. If you wish to carry a firearm, you would have to take a course, qualify, submit a packet the size of Mount Everest to the state. You had to get a psychological evaluation to ensure you were not trying to be a cowboy. The entire process could take up to 2 years, and the state could disqualify you without having to provide any answer as to why you were disqualified. I can honestly say there was only a handful of armed security officers in the valley. Anyway, one night while on shift, I received word from my dispatch my relief had called off and they were having no luck finding anyone to take the shift. This usually meant they were asking me to stay and cover the shift. I was tired and really had no interest in doing it, but I knew a management role was coming available soon, and I desperately wanted the position. I figured if I sucked it up and did the shift, it may increase the odds of me securing that position. Reluctantly, I agreed and carried on through my shift. I had started the new shift at the east end of the valley in a town called Thermal, and had been making my way steadily westbound towards Palm Springs. I had just finished checking a housing development in a town called La Quinta when I received word of an alarm activation at a business in Cathedral City, a town about 10 miles away. The business sat just off of Interstate 10, and me, being on Highway 111, took the quickest on-ramp and headed towards the alarm. I exited off the off-ramp and headed towards the business. Now, I advised dispatch of my location and advised it would take approximately 10 to 15 minutes to arrive. However, that night the traffic was very light, most likely due to the extreme cold temperature outside, so I actually made it in just about 8 minutes. As I approached the business, I followed the rules when approaching an alarm. I advised dispatch that I had arrived, logged my arrival time on my daily activity report, and activated my rotating yellow flashers on the roof of my vehicle. I turned on the spotlight and began to drive slowly around the building, shining the spotlight on all the doors and windows to check for any signs of forced entry. Usually, the entire process would take between 2 to 5 minutes, depending on the size of the building. This time, however, only seconds after activating my spotlight, I noticed a broken window to the back door of the building. I alerted dispatch via the radio to the discovery and waited for my response. This was where I made my mistake. Instead of immediately backing away from the area and logging it at a distance, I just assumed everything was fine and simply stayed put to log the discovery. After approximately 30 seconds, I looked up to see a group of men walking out of the building and heading directly toward me. I immediately put the car in reverse, but noticed there were already several men standing behind my patrol vehicle. I soon realized there was nowhere I could go without hitting one of these individuals. Immediately realizing this was not good, I grabbed my radio and began yelling into it.
1099, 1099. Officer needs assistance. Officer needs assistance.
At about this time, a Hispanic male appeared at the driver's side of my patrol vehicle. He was bald-headed and had several tattoos on his face, 2 of which were teardrops below one of his eyes.
Open the door.
He said as he bashed his hand against the window. I stared at him before quickly glancing around the vehicle. I could see at least 9 men surrounding the vehicle and possibly more. I looked over to see another man looking in my passenger side window. This man had a thin mustache and goatee, and he was glaring at me while also flashing one of the most evil grins I have ever seen in my life. I could see he was trying to open the passenger door, which thank God was still locked. I heard another hit on the window from my driver's side, and I looked back to see the man glaring at me.
I said open the door, fool.
He screamed before following it up with some foul and racial descriptions of me said in Spanish. I was officially scared completely out of my mind and had no idea what to do. I stared back at the man standing at my driver's side door. It was then another man, a third individual, had climbed onto the hood and started pounding on the front windshield, while another was grabbing for the trunk. All 3 men were now pounding on different windows. Leaving me with no other choice, I prepared to gun the vehicle, and whoever was in the way was going to get run over. I squeezed my eyes shut and prepared myself for what I was about to do. Just as I was about to push down hard on the accelerator, I saw red flashing blue and red lights behind my vehicle and the sound of several voices yelling.
Please, freeze!
I opened my eyes and turned to see all the men running away from the vehicle in different directions as 3 police cruisers and several officers pursued on foot. Within minutes, several of the men were captured, including the man who had come to the driver's side window. My dispatcher had called 911 and relayed the information immediately upon hearing my call for help. Luckily, the traffic was again light and the officers arrived quickly, surprising the men. Apparently, the group was part of a gang who had broken into the building as part of an initiation and were unaware they had triggered an alarm. One of the officers told me when they arrived, they observed the man on the driver's side was holding what turned out to be a .38 caliber snub-nose revolver. The man was on parole and on his 2nd strike. He was sent away to prison for life as part of the 3rd strike rule. Luckily, because of the dash cam footage, I did not have to testify, and as far as I know, none of my information was provided to any of them. The company was later bought out by a larger company, and I left shortly after to work for one of the Native American casinos in the area. And while this story may not be as scary as some you may have heard otherwise, it still, to this day, is one of the scariest things I've ever experienced in my life.
Now, this case that happened in Palm Springs, well, Cathedral City. This story is very, very, very clear to me, and I can vouch that this one actually took place because the dispatcher who actually called 911 when the distress call of 1099, officer needs assistance, actually came in, was me. I was the one that was working dispatch at another country club. And I honestly didn't fully understand exactly what happened until almost 2 days later when the officer came off his days off and showed up to get his patrol car. And it was then that he told me the full details of what happened. And yeah, it's scary to think of what could have happened if it had not been so light on traffic that night, and the fact that there was 3 double unit Riverside Sheriff's officers that just happened to be just a few blocks from that building where it took place. And I believe the actual arrival time that it took for those Metro officers, or for those Riverside Sheriff's officers to get there, was under 2.5 minutes. It was an amazing response, and to this day it still makes me kind of quiver thinking about that whole entire thing. It just yeah.